I never thought the people living just down my street, the very ones who waved at me every morning, would one day send bulldozers onto my land, without a single word to me. They carved through my property as if I didn't even exist. And when I tried to stop them, they didn't apologize. They sued me. Yes, my own HOA sued me for defending my own land. But what they didn't know was that this fight would end with me holding all the power. And the day it happened, everything changed forever. Welcome, folks, to HOA Max Stories, where real battles with homeowner associations come to life. My name's John Miller. I live in a small town just outside of Dallas, Texas. I'm not a lawyer, not a politician, just a man who worked his whole life to buy a piece of land, and ended up in the fight of my life against my own HOA. Before we dive deep, let me ask you something. If you've ever had an HOA give you trouble, or if you've ever felt pushed around by rules that don't make sense, hit that subscribe button. Think of it as sitting with me on the porch, two neighbors sharing stories over coffee. Go on, click it now, and while you do, tell me in the comments, where in the country are you watching this from? Because today, you're about to hear how one road turned into the biggest battle of my life. I still remember the morning it all began. The sun was just coming up, birds were singing in the trees, and I walked out with a hot cup of coffee in my hand. For me, mornings were always peaceful. I'd sit on my porch, look out at my land, and thank God that after so many years of hard work, this little piece of earth was mine. But that morning, I noticed something strange. There was a low rumbling sound in the distance. At first, I thought maybe a storm was rolling in, or maybe a neighbor running heavy equipment. But as the sound grew louder, my heart sank. It wasn't thunder. It was machines. I set my cup down and walked to the end of my driveway, and what I saw nearly made me drop to my knees. Huge trucks, bulldozers, a paving machine, right there on my land. Men in yellow vests and hard hats were cutting a line straight through my property. Dust was flying everywhere. The smell of asphalt filled the air. My land, my peace, was being destroyed before my very eyes. I shouted at them. "What are you doing? This is private property." But they barely even looked up. One man pointed behind him and said, "HOA approval. Talk to them." Then he just turned back and waved his hand for the bulldozer to keep moving. I couldn't believe it. My HOA? Without a letter? Without a phone call? Not even a single warning? I stormed back inside, grabbed my old file cabinet, and pulled out every paper I had, the deed, the maps, the surveys. Everything proved this was my land. My driveway. My road. But when I went down to the HOA office that afternoon, I got the shock of my life. They weren't apologetic. They weren't embarrassed. They weren't even polite. They sat there in that little boardroom with their clipboards and fake smiles, and they told me I should be grateful. Yes, grateful that they were improving access for the neighborhood. Grateful that my land was being ripped apart for what they called progress. I told them flat out, "You can't do this. This land belongs to me." One of them leaned forward, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Not anymore." My stomach turned. My face went red. I could feel the heat rising inside me. I left that office shaking, furious, and honestly, scared. But it didn't end there. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Thick envelope. Bold black letters across the top. It was from their lawyer. Not only were they refusing to stop, they were suing me. They said I was interfering with community development. That I was obstructing access. Imagine that, me, the homeowner, being sued for protecting my own property. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the letter spread out in front of me. My wife asked me what I was going to do. For a moment, I honestly didn't know. Part of me wanted to give up. To just accept that I couldn't fight them. But then I thought of every hour I worked to pay for that land. Every drop of sweat that went into building that home. I thought of how proud I was the first day I signed that deed. And something inside me snapped. I said out loud, "No. I won't let them take this from me. Not now. Not ever." The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not a big fancy firm. Just a small-town attorney who knew property law. I brought him every paper, every map, every detail. He sat there flipping through them with a half-smile and said, "They don't have a case. You do." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. But I also knew the fight was just beginning. Because this wasn't just about papers and maps. This was about power. And the HOA had plenty of it. The days leading up to the first hearing were the longest of my life. Every time I drove past the road being laid across my land, I felt my blood boil. Neighbors whispered. Some said I should just let it go. But others stopped me in private and said quietly, "We're rooting for you. Don't let them win." That gave me strength. Finally, the day came. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust. The judge sat high above us, glasses on the tip of his nose. The HOA's lawyers were dressed sharp, expensive suits, briefcases polished like mirrors. And then there was me. A simple homeowner. Just fighting for what was mine. When the judge called my case, my hands trembled. My voice shook. But I stood tall. I told my story. I showed my maps. I proved every inch of that road belonged to me. And as I spoke, I noticed something. The judge leaned forward. He wasn't bored. He wasn't dismissive. He was listening. For the first time, I realized maybe I had a chance. And that's where part 1 ends. But let me ask you this. If it were you, and your HOA started building a road right through your property without permission, what would you do first? Would you fight them in court like I did, or would you walk away to keep the peace? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would handle it. The courtroom that day gave me hope, but it also gave me something else. A warning. Because while I was standing there showing my papers, telling my truth, I caught the eyes of the HOA board members sitting in the back. They weren't scared. They weren't sorry. They were smiling. It was the kind of smile that says, "We're not done with you yet." And I was right. A few days later, after that first hearing, I found another envelope waiting in my mailbox. This one wasn't from the court. It was from the HOA directly. Inside was a letter telling me I had been fined thousands of dollars. They claimed I had blocked community development. They said I violated HOA bylaws. And right there, in bold black letters, it said, "If you fail to pay, further legal action will be taken." I couldn't believe it. Not only had they trespassed on my land, not only had they dragged me into court, now they were fining me for fighting back? It felt less like a neighborhood association, and more like a mob. I took that letter and drove straight to their office. The same little building with the squeaky glass door, the same front desk lady who looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe. I stormed into the boardroom, slapped that letter on the table, and said, "What the hell is this?" The chairman, a tall man with slicked back hair, leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You can't win," he said calmly. "The more you fight us, the more expensive it gets for you. Maybe it's time to accept reality." His words echoed in my ears. Accept reality? Whose reality? Theirs? Where they owned my land? Where they made the rules and changed them whenever they wanted? I clenched my fists. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. I told him, "You picked the wrong man." That meeting ended with me walking out, but as I left, I knew something had changed. This wasn't just a fight over land anymore. This was war. Days turned into weeks. The HOA kept sending more letters. Fines. Threats. Notices stuck on my door like I was some kind of criminal. But I wasn't alone. Neighbors began whispering to me at the mailbox. One old couple told me they had been fined for having the wrong color mailbox. Another man down the street said the HOA harassed him about his garden. A single mother said she'd been threatened with foreclosure because of a missed fee. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just my story. This was everyone's story. The HOA had been bullying us for years. My road, my case, was just the tip of the iceberg. So I started keeping records. Every letter they sent me, I kept. Every neighbor's story, I wrote down. I gathered it all like ammunition. Meanwhile, their road project continued. I drive home from work and see the machines digging deeper into my land. Every fresh line of asphalt across my property felt like a knife in my chest. I spent sleepless nights at the kitchen table, maps and papers spread out in front of me, my lawyer on the phone telling me to stay strong. But one night, something happened that changed everything. Around 11 p.m., I heard tires crunching on gravel outside. I peeked through my window and saw headlights pulling up near the construction site. 2 HOA board members stepped out of their cars. They weren't there to work. They weren't there to inspect. They were there to meet. I couldn't hear what they said, but I watched them pull out a folder, flip through papers, and point at my land with flashlights. Their voices were low, secretive. Then one of them laughed. That laugh cut through the night. It was the laugh of men who thought they were untouchable. And that's when I knew, this went deeper than just a road. There were deals being made. Money moving around. Power games being played. The betrayal wasn't just that they stole my land. The betrayal was that they were stealing from all of us. From that moment, I promised myself something. I wouldn't just defend my land. I would expose them. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again. I showed him everything. The fines. The threats. The witnesses. The late-night meeting I had seen. He leaned back in his chair, tapped his pen, and said quietly, "If you want to take this all the way, you can." And that lit a fire in me I didn't know I had. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a fighter. And if they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But here's the question that still lingers in my mind, and maybe you can help me answer it. When the people who are supposed to protect a neighborhood turn into the very ones destroying it, what should a homeowner do? Should we fight them head-on, no matter the cost, or walk away for the sake of peace? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would face betrayal like this. The night I caught those board members meeting in secret, something inside me changed forever. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, but more than that, I was ready. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I looked out at the road cutting through my land, and I told myself, they will regret this. I started preparing for war. My kitchen table turned into a battlefield. Stacks of letters, fines, maps, photos, and complaints from neighbors covered every inch of it. I bought a cheap recorder and started taping every conversation I had with the HOA. I carried a notebook everywhere, writing down every date, every word, every threat. I knew if I wanted to win, I couldn't just rely on anger. I needed proof. I needed the truth. And the truth was everywhere once I started looking. One neighbor told me he had been fined because his grass was 2 inches taller than regulation. Another showed me a notice that his children's swing set violated community design standards. A widow down the street broke down crying in front of me, saying the HOA threatened to put a lien on her home because she was late on dues after her husband died. Every story broke my heart. But each one also fueled me. I realized something powerful. This wasn't just my fight. This was everyone's fight. And if I stood tall, maybe they would too. So I called a meeting at my house. I invited every neighbor who had ever whispered about the HOA, every person who had ever felt bullied or cheated. That night, my living room was packed. Old couples. Young families. People with tears in their eyes. I stood there and told them everything. How the HOA stole my road. How they sued me. How they fined me. How they laughed in the dark while making secret deals. The room was silent, until one man stood up and said, "We're with you." Then another said, "It's time somebody stopped them." That night, for the first time, I didn't feel alone. But I also knew this battle would not be easy. The HOA wasn't just a few board members. They had money, lawyers, power. They had been in control for years, unchallenged. But they had also made one mistake. They underestimated me. The next court hearing was set for 2 weeks later. And those 2 weeks became a blur of preparation. My lawyer drilled me on every detail. He told me to stay calm, to speak clearly, to let the evidence speak for itself. But inside, I was boiling. Every night I drove past that road and saw strangers walking on it, driving on it, as if it had always belonged to the neighborhood. I felt robbed all over again. And yet, I stayed patient. Because I knew patience was a weapon too. Finally, the day came. The courthouse was packed. Not just with lawyers and board members, but with neighbors. Dozens of them came to watch. Some were curious. Others were there to support me. When the judge walked in, the room went quiet. The HOA's lawyers went first. They spoke in fancy words, trying to paint me as the enemy of progress. They said the road was necessary. They said I was obstructing the community. They twisted every detail to make me look like a villain. But when it was my turn, I didn't just show maps and deeds. I told my story. I looked the judge in the eye and said, "Your Honor, this isn't about progress. This is about theft. This is about bullying. This is about an organization that thinks it's above the law." I handed over letters, photos, testimonies from neighbors. One by one, the truth unfolded. And as I spoke, I could see it happening. The faces of the board members turned pale. The judge's eyebrows furrowed. The audience leaned forward, hanging on every word. For the first time, the HOA looked weak. The hearing lasted hours. But to me, it felt like minutes. When it ended, the judge said he would review everything carefully before making a decision. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter. Not because I had already won, but because I knew I had fought with everything I had. But as I stepped into the sunlight, I also knew something darker. The HOA wasn't going to take this lying down. They weren't going to roll over and give me my land back. They were going to fight dirtier than ever before. And I was ready for it. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying every word, every detail. I sat on my porch staring at that road, and I thought about what was coming. They could try to ruin me financially. They could try to smear my name. They could try to scare me into quitting. But I wasn't quitting. Not now. Not ever. Because this was bigger than me. This was about every homeowner who had ever felt powerless. Every person who had ever been told you can't win. And I decided then. I was going to prove them wrong. Now let me ask you. If you were in my shoes, standing in court against people with money, lawyers, and power, would you fight them with everything you had, or would you walk away to save yourself the stress? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know what kind of fighter you would be. The courthouse doors closed behind me that day, but the sound of them slamming still echoed in my chest. I knew the fight had only just begun. For the next week, the HOA doubled down. They sent letters to my house almost every other day, demanding payments for fines I didn't know, threatening liens on my property, warning me that if I lost, I could lose not only the road, but my home. It felt like psychological warfare. My wife would hand me the envelopes with trembling hands, and I could see the worry in her eyes. My kids asked me why men in suits kept showing up at our door. Neighbors whispered that the board was making an example out of me. But instead of breaking me, every letter, every threat, only fueled my fire. I told myself, if they think fear will silence me, they've already lost. The second major hearing came fast. The courthouse was even more crowded this time. Word had spread across town. People wanted to see if a simple homeowner could actually take down an HOA. As I walked inside, I could feel the eyes on me. some full of support, others full of doubt. But I kept my head high. The board members were there too. Polished, confident, almost smug. They whispered to each other and smirked when they saw me. But I had something they didn't. The truth. And a growing army of neighbors behind me. When the judge called us in, the tension was thick. Their lawyer went first. He strutted around the courtroom, speaking with the kind of arrogance only money can buy. He waved papers in the air, trying to show bylaws, rules, technicalities. He claimed I was a threat to community harmony. He even tried to suggest that I was unstable, dangerous, unfit to be part of the neighborhood. It was a smear campaign, plain and simple. And for a moment, sitting there, I felt the weight of it. The way his words twisted reality made me feel small, like maybe the whole system was rigged against me. But then, it was my turn. I stood. My legs shook at first, but then I looked at the judge, and behind him, I saw the faces of neighbors who had suffered in silence for years. People who had been fined, bullied, humiliated. I took a deep breath. And I spoke from the heart. I didn't use fancy words. I didn't have slick arguments. I just told the truth. I said, "Your Honor, I am not a troublemaker. I am not against progress. I am a homeowner who bought this land with honest money. And this HOA walked onto my property, built a road without permission, sued me for resisting, and has since tried to destroy me with threats and lies. If they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone." Then I handed over my evidence. Photos of the bulldozers on my land. Copies of the fines. Witness statements from neighbors. Letters they had written in fear. The judge flipped through each page slowly. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the tick of the old clock on the wall. And then it happened. The judge leaned forward and asked the HOA's lawyer a simple question. "Where is the permission document? Where is the proof that you had legal right to build this road?" The lawyer stuttered. He looked through his papers. He asked for a recess. But there was no document. There never had been. A ripple went through the room. Neighbors looked at each other. Some even gasped. The board members shifted in their seats, sweat forming on their brows. For the first time, they looked weak. The hearing dragged on for hours. Their lawyers tried every trick in the book. They argued technicalities. They tried to confuse the judge with legal jargon. But no matter what they said, the truth remained. They had trespassed. They had lied. And they had overreached. When the session ended, the judge announced he needed more time to deliberate. No verdict yet. Just more waiting. But even without a verdict, I walked out of that courthouse with my head high. Because the cracks had begun to show. The mighty HOA, so confident, so untouchable, had been exposed. And my neighbors saw it too. As I walked down the courthouse steps, people clapped me on the back. An old woman grabbed my hand and whispered, "Don't stop. You're fighting for all of us." For the first time, I realized this battle was bigger than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about one road anymore. It was about breaking the chains of fear that had gripped our entire neighborhood for years. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, staring at the pile of papers, the letters, the fines. I thought about everything I had endured. And I thought about what was still coming. Because deep down, I knew the HOA wasn't finished. They would come back harder. Dirtier. Meaner. And I would have to be ready for whatever came next. But one thought kept repeating in my head, over and over. Maybe, just maybe, they had finally underestimated me too much. And now let me ask you this. If you were sitting in that courtroom, watching the HOA's lawyer fumble when asked for proof, would you feel relieved, or would you be even more nervous, knowing they'd come back even stronger? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would handle that moment. That night, after the hearing, I barely slept. The judge's question kept echoing in my head. Where is the permission document? The fact that their lawyer had no answer was like a crack in a dam. And I knew if I pushed hard enough, the whole thing might collapse. But cracks also make desperate men dangerous. The very next morning, I woke up to find a fresh notice pinned to my front door. This one wasn't about fines or fees. It was a warning. According to the letter, I was now in violation for leaving my trash cans visible from the road. Another letter came the next day, a notice about unauthorized modifications to my front porch. They were piling on fake violations, one after another, trying to drown me in paper, hoping I'd break under the weight. But instead of breaking, I laughed. Because it meant they were scared. The HOA, for all its power and arrogance, was finally showing its weakness. They were scrambling. And I was ready to use that. I doubled down. My lawyer and I started digging deeper. We pulled HOA records, financial reports, board meeting notes. And what we found was worse than I imagined. Money was missing. Contracts were handed out without bids. Fees were being used for projects nobody had approved. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was corruption. I knew I had them. The next court hearing, I didn't just bring evidence about the road. I brought their own dirty secrets. When the judge asked me to speak, I calmly laid it all out. Your Honor, this case began because the HOA took my land without permission. But as I searched for answers, I discovered something bigger. This board has been abusing its power, misusing funds, and bullying homeowners into silence. My road is only one example. The real problem is corruption at the core. I handed over the documents. The judge's face hardened as he flipped through page after page. The HOA's lawyers stammered. The board members squirmed in their seats. And then, silence. For the first time, the room wasn't filled with their voices or my defense. It was filled with the undeniable weight of truth. Neighbors in the back whispered to each other. I saw heads nodding. I saw fists clenched. People were angry. Not just at what happened to me, but at what had been happening to all of us for years. The HOA's lawyer tried to object, tried to dismiss it as irrelevant. But the judge cut him off. He said, "This court takes allegations of corruption very seriously. These matters will be reviewed." The lawyer's face went pale. The board members looked like ghosts. And in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. It wasn't just me standing alone anymore. It was me, and the entire neighborhood. After that day, something amazing started happening. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak suddenly found their voices. They came to my house with their own stories, their own letters, their own evidence. People who had stayed silent for years were finally ready to fight. We weren't just individuals anymore. We were a movement. The HOA tried one last trick. They called for an emergency meeting, hoping to rally the community against me. They spread rumors that I was trying to take over, that I was power hungry, that I wanted to destroy the HOA. But when the meeting came, the opposite happened. The room was packed wall to wall. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding documents, others just holding anger on their faces. When the chairman tried to speak, people shouted him down. When they tried to defend their actions, homeowners raised their hands with evidence. And then it happened. A voice from the back called out, "We want a new board." The room erupted. Cheers. Shouts. Applause. In that moment, I realized the fight wasn't just about me winning in court. It was about all of us taking back control. I stood up and said, if you want real change, if you want an HOA that works for the people instead of against them, then stand with me. And one by one, they did. By the end of that night, the once powerful board looked small, surrounded by angry homeowners demanding accountability. It was the beginning of the end for them. But for me, it was just the beginning of something bigger. Because winning wasn't enough anymore. I didn't just want justice for my land. I wanted to make sure this never happened again, to me, or to anyone else in our neighborhood. I wanted control. And now let me ask you this. If you uncovered corruption in your HOA, proof of money stolen, proof of abuse of power, would you stop after winning your personal case? Or would you go further and try to take over the entire board yourself? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how far you would go when the truth is finally on your side. That night after the community meeting, I sat on my porch staring at the half-finished road cutting across my land. For the first time, it didn't look like a scar. It looked like a battlefield I had already started winning. Because the truth was out now. And once people see the truth, you can't make them unsee it. The board that had ruled over us for years with fear and fines suddenly looked powerless. Their threats, their letters, their fake rules, all of it seemed smaller now. But I knew something else too. Cornered animals fight the hardest. And the HOA board was cornered. The days that followed were tense. They tried to cling to control, scheduling secret board sessions, sending out carefully worded emails to the community, trying to make themselves look like victims. But nobody was buying it anymore. The neighbors were done being silent. They knocked on my door day and night, bringing more evidence, more stories, more support. Some brought boxes of old letters, others brought photos of violations that were never real. One man even handed me a stack of receipts proving the HOA had overcharged him for years. It was no longer just about me. It was about all of us. And that's when the idea took hold in my mind. What if we didn't just fight them in court? What if we took control? The thought kept me up at night. I imagined a new HOA, one run by homeowners, for homeowners. One that didn't abuse power, didn't steal money, didn't threaten people. A fair HOA. A just HOA. But to get there, we had to break the old one. The next community meeting was even bigger than the last. Word had spread beyond our neighborhood. People from nearby areas showed up just to watch. The room was packed so tightly that some stood outside by the windows, straining to listen. The board sat at the front like kings on a crumbling throne. Their faces tight, their voices sharp. But their eyes showed fear. When the chairman tried to speak, the crowd drowned him out. People shouted, waved letters in the air, demanded answers. I let it go on for a few minutes, then stood up. The room grew quiet. All eyes turned to me. I said, "We've all seen what they've done. We've all lived under their rules. They took my land. They tried to ruin me. They lied, they stole, and they bullied. But now we know the truth. And the truth is stronger than fear." The room erupted in cheers. I raised my hand and the noise settled. I looked right at the board and said, "Your time is over." There was silence for a moment, and then a neighbor shouted, "We want a vote." The room exploded again. Under the HOA's own bylaws, the very rules they had used to control us, the homeowners had the right to vote out the board and elect new leadership. They never thought anyone would challenge them. But that night, we did. Ballots were passed out. People lined up, one by one, marking their choice. The board members whispered nervously to each other, their hands trembling as the votes were collected. When the count was finished, the result was clear. They were out. Every single one of them. The room shook with cheers, claps, whistles. People hugged. Some even cried. For years, they had lived under the thumb of a corrupt board. And now, they were free. Then all eyes turned to me. Someone shouted, "Make him president." The crowd picked it up, chanting louder and louder until the walls rattled. I never asked for power. I never wanted to be in charge. But in that moment, I realized this wasn't about what I wanted. It was about what we all needed. And so, I accepted. I became the president of the very HOA that had once tried to destroy me. The first meeting under the new leadership was different. No threats. No lies. No fake fines. Instead, we opened the books, showed the accounts, laid out every dollar. Transparency. Honesty. Respect. The neighbors couldn't believe it. For the first time in years, the HOA felt like it belonged to us again. And as for the road? It still ran across my land. But now it wasn't a symbol of their power. It was a reminder of how far we had come. A reminder of how one fight can spark a movement. Looking back, I realized something powerful. Sometimes the battles you don't choose are the ones that define you. I didn't ask them to steal my road. I didn't ask them to sue me. But when they did, they woke up a part of me I never knew existed. A fighter. A leader. A voice for people who had been silenced too long. And as I sat there that night, gavel in hand, looking out at my neighbors smiling for the first time in years, I knew this wasn't just my victory. It was all of ours. And now let me ask you something. If your HOA had stolen from you, bullied you, and then you finally had the chance to take it all back, would you step up and lead like I did, or would you walk away once justice was done? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know if you would take control, or just take your peace and leave. The night I held that gavel in my hand for the first time, it felt heavier than I expected. Not because of the wood, but because of the weight of everything that had led me here. From the moment I saw bulldozers on my land, to the day I was dragged into court, to the nights of fear, fines, and betrayal, all of it had built to this. And now, the power that once crushed us, was finally in our hands. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. I called emergency meetings. We opened the HOA books and showed every homeowner where their money had gone. The numbers told a story of greed and corruption. Thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Fake maintenance projects that never happened. Overpriced contracts handed out to friends of board members. People gasped as they saw it. Some shouted in anger. Others shook their heads in disbelief. For years, they had trusted this board. Paid their dues faithfully. Believed the lies about improvements and community projects. And now the truth was right there, black and white. We voted to hire an independent auditor. We set up strict rules for every future dollar spent. Every meeting would be public. Every decision would be voted on. No more secrets. And little by little, trust began to grow again. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years now shared coffee on porches, swapped stories in driveways, waved again at passing cars. It felt like a neighborhood reborn. But for me, it was more personal. I'd walk out each morning and look at that road cutting through my land, the road that started it all. At first, I hated it. I saw it as a scar, a reminder of the pain. But over time, I began to see it differently. That road was proof. Proof that no matter how small you feel, you can stand up to something bigger. Proof that power doesn't belong to the loudest voices or the richest pockets, it belongs to those who refuse to give up. One afternoon, as I stood there staring at the road, a neighbor walked up. An old man with a cane, gray hair blowing in the wind. He tapped his cane on the asphalt and said quietly, "You did what none of us thought possible. You didn't just win your fight. You gave us back our dignity." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. I just nodded. Because deep down, I knew he was right. This fight had changed me. It had changed all of us. And the old board? They vanished into the shadows. Some moved away. Others still live nearby, but they don't show their faces much. Every time they drive down this road, they're reminded that they lost. The irony still makes me smile. They built this road to show their power. But in the end, it became the very road that led to their downfall. As months passed, things began to settle. Life became normal again. But it wasn't the same normal. It was better. Stronger. Fairer. I kept serving as HOA president, but I didn't do it alone. We built committees, gave every homeowner a voice, and made decisions together. The power that once rested in the hands of a few, now belonged to everyone. And in quiet moments, I would think back to that day, the morning I walked out with my coffee, heard the bulldozers, and thought my world was falling apart. If I had known then what that road would lead to, I wouldn't have believed it. Because sometimes life gives you battles you never asked for. But those battles reveal who you really are. And me? I discovered I wasn't just a homeowner. I wasn't just a man fighting for land. I was someone who could stand up against fear, against power, against injustice. And win. The fight was long. It was messy. It cost me sleep, money, peace. But in the end, it gave me something priceless. It gave me control over my own life again. It gave my neighbors hope. And it gave us a community we could finally be proud of. So when I stand on that road today, the sun shining bright across the asphalt, kids riding bikes where bulldozers once roared, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel victory. I feel peace. Because this road is mine. And so is everything we fought for. And now I want to ask you something. If life handed you a fight like this, one that seemed impossible, one that everyone told you to walk away from, would you have the courage to push back, or would you let it go to keep your peace? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know if you believe the fight is worth it.